guys are too much. I think all the muggles are home tonight watching TV. The real people are here. You don't think this thing's electrified, do you? I can read, but I don't think I can sit in this chair for the whole... Well, so that was a really nice introduction, and people said very nice things, and now I think I'll read a really gross story. because it's what I do. Hope you enjoyed your supper, because you may not for long. About 25 years ago, one of my wife's sisters told me about going to a pie eating contest in a small town. Some of you know this story. One of the contestants ate too fast and threw up. Now, I never met a gross story I didn't like, so I adapted it, juiced it up, put it on steroids, and dropped it into a book called Different Seasons. And then, oh, thank you. And then Rob Reiner put it into a movie called Stand By Me. His was the PG-13 version. This is the R. This is The Revenge of Lard-Ass Hogan from Stand By Me. They came up onto the platform one by one and stood behind a long trestle table. The table was stacked high with pies and stood at the edge of the platform. Above it were loop necklaces of bare 100-watt bulbs with moths banging softly against them. Above the platform, bathed in spotlights, was a long sign which read, "The Great Gretna Pie Eat of 1960. To either side of this sign hung battered loudspeakers supplied by Chuck Day's appliance shop. Bill Travis, the reigning champion, was Chuck's cousin. As each contestant came up, his hands bound behind him and his shirt front open like Sidney Carton on his way to the guillotine, Mayor Charbonneau would announce his name over Chuck's PA system and tie a large white bib around his neck. Calvin Spear received token applause only. In spite of his belly, he was considered an underdog, second only to the Hogan Kid. After Spear, Bob Cormier was introduced. Cormier was a disc jockey who did a popular afternoon program on WLAM in Lewiston. He got a bigger hand, accompanied by a few screams from the teenage girls in the audience. The girls thought he was cute. John Wiggins, principal of Gretna Elementary School, followed Cormier. He received a hearty cheer from the older section of the audience and a few scattered boos from members of his student body. Next, Mayor Charbonneau introduced the Kid, a new participant in the annual Great Gretna Pie Eat, but one we expect great things from in the future, young Master David Hogan. He got a big round of applause as Mayor Charbonneau tied on his bib, and as it was dying away, a rehearsed Greek chorus just beyond the reach of the 100-watt bulbs cried out in wicked unison, "Go get 'em, Lardass!" There were muffled shrieks of laughter, running footsteps, a few shadows that no one could or would identify, some nervous laughter, some judicial frowns, the largest from His Honor Charbonneau, the most visible figure of authority. Lardass himself appeared not to even notice, the small smile greasing his thick lips and creasing his thick chops did not change as the mayor, still frowning largely, tied his bib around his neck and told him not to pay any attention to fools in the audience, as if the mayor had any faint inkling of what monstrous fools Lard-Ass Hogan had suffered and would continue to suffer as he rumbled through life like a Nazi tank. The last contestant to mount the bunting-decorated stage drew the loudest and most sustained applause. This was the legendary Bill Travis, 6 feet 5 inches tall, gangling and voracious. Travis was a mechanic at Mailing's Amico station down by the rail yard. A likable fellow if there ever was one, and his stomach seemed to be a bottomless well. It was common knowledge, tell me if I fall off the edge of this thing, won't you? It was common knowledge around town that there was more involved in the great Gretna pie eat than a mere $5, at least for Bill Travis there was. There was some dispute around town as to whether Jerry Mailing gave Bill a bonus for the extra business his yearly feed, or yearly eat, if you prefer, brought into his station, or if he got an out-and-out raise. Whatever way it was, there could be no doubt that Travis did better than most small-town wrench jockeys. He had a nice-looking 2-story ranch out on the Sabattis Road, and certain snide people referred to it as the house that pies built. The pie eat was also a hot wagering event in town. Contestants were observed and discussed as ardently as thoroughbreds before the Kentucky Derby. The wagerers accosted contestants' friends, relatives, even mere acquaintances. They pried out any and all details concerning the contestants' eating habits. There was always a lot of discussion about that year's official pie. Apple was considered a heavy pie. Apricot, a light one, although a contestant had to resign himself to a day or two in the bathroom after downing 3 or 4 apricot pies. That year's official pie, blueberry, was considered a happy medium. There were other questions. Was he a fast eater who slowed down, or a slow eater who started to speed up as things got serious, or just a good, steady, all-around gobbler? How many hot dogs could he put away while watching a Babe Ruth game down at the baseball field? Was he much of a beer drinker? And if so, how many bottles did he usually put away in the course of an evening? Was he a belcher? It was believed that a belcher was tougher to beat over the long haul. All of this and other information was sifted. The odds were made. The bets were laid. I'd guess that close to $1,000 changed hands during the week before pie night. Now that probably smells like pretty small beans to you, but it was a lot of money to be passing around a small town 50 years ago. And because the contest was honest and a strict time limit of 10 minutes was observed, no one objected to a competitor betting on himself, and Bill Travis did every year. Talk was, as he nodded smiling to his audience on that summer night in 1960, that he'd bet a substantial amount on himself again, and the best he'd been able to do this year was 1-5 odds. And the defending champion, Mayor Charbonneau trumpeted, Gretna's own Bill Travis. Whoo, Bill! How many you going through tonight, Bill? You going for 10, Billy boy? I got $2 on you, Bill. Don't let me down, boy. Nodding and smiling with all modesty, Bill Travis allowed the mayor to tie his bib around his neck. Then he sat down at the far right end of the table, near the place where Mayor Charbonneau would stand during the contest. From right to left then, the eaters were Bill Travis, David Hogan, Bob Cormier, Principal John Wiggins, and Calvin Spear, holding down the stool on the far left. Mayor Charbonneau introduced Sylvia Dodge, who was even more of a contest figure than Bill Travis himself. She had been president of the Gretna Ladies Auxiliary for years beyond telling, since the Civil War, according to some town wits. And it was she who oversaw the baking of each year's pies, including a weigh-in ceremony on Mr. Banachek's butcher scales down at the Freedom Market to make sure that each pie weighed within an ounce of the others. Sylvia smiled regally down at the crowd, her blue hair twinkling under the hot glow of the light bulbs. She made a short speech about how glad she was that so much of the town had turned out to celebrate their hardy pioneer forebears, the people who made this country great, for it was great. Calvin Spear's belly rumbled noisily, going. There was laughter and even some applause. Sylvia Dodge, who knew perfectly well that Calvin was both a Democrat and a Catholic. Either would have been forgivable alone, but the two combined never. Managed to blush, smile, and look furious all at the same time. She cleared her throat and wound up with a ringing exhortation to every boy and girl in the audience, telling them to always hold the red, white, and blue high, both in their hands and in their hearts, and to remember that smoking was a dirty, evil habit which made you cough. The boys and girls in the audience, most of whom would be wearing peace medallions and smoking not Camels but marijuana in another 8 years, shuffled their feet and waited for the action to begin. "Let's talk, more eatin'," someone in the back row called, and there was another burst of applause. Mayor Charbonneau handed Sylvia a stopwatch and a silver police whistle, which she would blow after 10 minutes of all-out pie eating. Mayor Charbonneau would then step forward and hold up the hand of the winner. "Are you ready?" His Honor's voice rolled through the Great Day PA and off down Main Street. The 5 pie eaters declared that they were ready. "Are you set?" His Honor declared further. The eaters growled that they were set. Down street, a boy set off a rattling skein of firecrackers. Mayor Charbonneau raised one pudgy hand and then dropped it. "Go!" 5 heads dropped into 5 pie plates. The sound was like 5 large feet stamping firmly into mud. Wet chomping noises rose on the mild night air and then were blotted out as the bettors and partisans in the crowd began to cheer on their honeys. And no more than the first pie had been demolished before most people realized that a possible upset was in the making. Lard Hogan, a 7-1 underdog because of his age and inexperience, was eating like a boy possessed. His jaws machine-gunned up crust. The contest rules required that only the top crust of the pie be eaten, not the bottom. And when that had disappeared, a huge sucking sound issued from between his lips. It was like the sound of an industrial vacuum cleaner going to work. Then his whole head disappeared into the pie plate. He raised it 15 seconds later to indicate he was done. He looked as if he had been dipped in lumpy blue paint. He was done before the legendary Bill Travis had finished half of his first pie. Startled applause went up as the mayor examined Lardass's pie plate and pronounced it clean enough. He whipped a second pie into place before the pacemaker. Lardass had gobbled a regulation pie in 42 seconds. It was a contest record. He went at the second pie more furiously yet, his head bobbing and smooching in the soft blueberry filling. Bill Travis threw him a worried glance as he called for his second blueberry pie. As he told friends later, he felt he was in a real contest for the first time since '57, when George Gamage gobbled 3 pies in 4 minutes and then fainted dead away. He had to wonder, he said, if he was up against a boy or a demon. He redoubled his efforts. But when Travis redoubled, Lardass trebled. Blueberries flew from his second pie dish, staining the tablecloth around him like a Jackson Pollock painting. There were blueberries in his hair, blueberries on his bib, blueberries standing out on his forehead as if in an agony of concentration he'd begun sweating blueberries. "Done," he cried, lifting his head from his second pie dish before Bill Travis had even consumed the crust on his new pie. "Better slow down," His Honor murmured. Charbonneau himself had $10 resting on Travis. "You gotta pace yourself, kid, if you want to hold out." It was as if Lardass hadn't heard. He tore into his third pie with lunatic speed, jaws moving with lightning rapidity, and then... But I must interrupt to tell you that there was an empty bottle in the medicine chest at Lardass Hogan's house. Earlier, it had been 3/4 full of castor oil, perhaps the most noxious fluid that the good Lord ever allowed on or beneath the surface of the earth. Lardass had emptied that bottle himself, drinking every last drop and then licking the rim, his mouth twisting, his belly gagging, his brain filled with thoughts of sweet revenge. And as he worked his way through his third pie, Lardass began to deliberately torture himself with grisly fantasies. He was not eating pies at all. He was eating cow flops. He was eating great big gobs of greasy, grimy gopher guts. He was eating diced up woodchuck intestines with blueberry sauce poured over them. Rancid blueberry sauce. He finished his third pie and called for his fourth, now one full pie ahead of the legendary Bill Travis. The fickle crowd, sensing a new and unexpected champ in the making, began to cheer him on lustily. But Lardass had no hope or intention of winning. He could not have continued at the pace he was currently setting if his own mother's life had been the prize. And besides, winning for him was losing. Revenge was the only blue ribbon he sought. His belly groaning with castor oil, his throat opening and closing sickly, he finished his fourth pie and called for his fifth, the ultimate pie. Blueberries become Electra, so to speak. He dropped his head into the dish, breaking the crust, and snuffled blueberries up his nose. Blueberries went down his shirt. The contents of his stomach seemed to suddenly gain weight. He chewed up pasty pastry crust and swallowed it. He inhaled blueberries. And suddenly, the moment of revenge was at hand. They pay me to make this up. And it's the best job in the world. All right, back to the action. Suddenly the moment of revenge was at hand. His stomach clenched like a strong hand encased in a slick rubber glove. His throat opened. Lardass raised his head. He grinned at Bill Travis with blue teeth. Puke rumbled up his throat like a 6-ton Peterbilt shooting through a tunnel. It roared out of his mouth in a huge blue and yellow glurt, warm and gaily steaming. It covered Bill Travis, who had only time to utter one nonsense syllable. Goog was what it sounded like. Women in the audience screamed. Calvin Spear, who had watched this unannounced event with a numb and surprised expression on his face, leaned conversationally over the table as if to explain to the gaping audience what had just happened and puked on the head of Marguerite Charbonneau, the mayor's wife. She screamed and backed away, pawing futilely at her hair, which was now covered with a mixture of crushed berries, baked beans, and partially digested hot dogs. The latter two had been Cal Spear's dinner. She turned to her good friend Maria Lavin and threw up on the front of Maria's buckskin jacket. In rapid succession, like a replay of the firecrackers, Bill Travis blew a great and seemingly supercharged jet of vomit out over the first 2 rows of spectators, his stunned face proclaiming to one and all, "Man, I just can't believe I'm doing this." Chuck Day, who had received a generous portion of Bill Travis's surprise gift, threw up on his hush puppies and then blinked at them wonderingly, knowing full well that stuff would never come off suede. John Wiggins, principal of Gretna Elementary, opened his blue-lined mouth and said reprovingly, "Really, this has..." As befitted a man of his breeding and position, he did it in his own pie plate. The mayor, who found himself suddenly presiding over what must have seemed like a stomach flu hospital ward rather than a pie-eating contest, opened his mouth to call the whole thing off and upchucked on the microphone. "Jesus save us," moaned Sylvia Dodge, and then her outraged supper bolted upstairs. jumped from the emergency exit, and landed with a large wet splash on the back of the mayor's Robert Hall suit coat. Lard-ass Hogan, now at the absolute apogee of his young life, beamed happily out at the audience. People staggered around in drunken circles, holding their throats and making weak, cawing noises. Someone's pet Pekingese ran past the stage, yapping crazily, and a man wearing jeans and a Western-style silk shirt threw up on it, nearly drowning it. Mrs. Brockway, the Methodist minister's wife, made a long basso burping noise, which was followed by a gusher of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and apple cobbler. The cobbler looked as if it might have been quite good when it first went down. Jerry Mailing, who had come to see his pet mechanic walk away with all the marbles again, decided to get the hell out of this madhouse. He got about 15 yards before tripping over a kid's little red wagon and realizing he had landed in a puddle of warm yark. Jerry tossed his cookies in his own lap and told folks later he only thanked Providence he had been wearing his coveralls. And Miss Norman, who taught English at the Gretna High School, vomited into her own purse in an agony of propriety. Lard-ass Hogan watched it all, his large face calm and beaming, his stomach suddenly sweet and steady, with a warm balm it might never know again, the balm of utter and complete satisfaction. He took the slightly tacky microphone from the trembling hand of Mayor Charbonneau and said, "I declare this year's contest a draw." Thank you.